Let's take a look at the author management test. So up until this point, we've done the very basic of an author can be created. So let's go ahead and tackle how to actually refine this test a little bit more. First and foremost, let's go ahead and run our entire suite. PHP unit, and sure enough, we are at green. Now this right here, this is bothering me a little bit. So I typically have this be plural, as in authors, /authors/post, something like that. If we take a look at our book, we're actually hitting /books. So let's go ahead and keep it consistent, and that's going to be my very first change. I'll go ahead and hit that with an S, and let's run our test. Of course, we get a failure, as we would expect on authors management test, line 25, and of course that's going to be right when we try to assert something. So what we need to do here is go ahead and change our route. So this is going to be authors, and we do have the authors controller already, so that'll be nice and consistent, and we're back to green. Quick little refactor just to get started. So the next thing I want to do, same as I did with the other test, is actually extract this into its own method, and we're just going to call this data, and let's go ahead and create a private function for data, and this is simply just going to return that very same array. Now the reason why I do this, and let me show you in the previous test, let's go back to the book management test. If we scroll down here, I do basically have that very same private setup, and the nice thing is this: when we're going to test our validation rules, then you can use array merge alongside with this new data to actually override a single field. This will allow us to actually be able to have valid data be invalidated in only the particular way that we want to invalidate it, as opposed to having to rewrite that over and over. The next added bonus is that if we add a new field, then we only need to add it to this array right here, and all of our tests would continue to run properly. So that's just another nice little thing that we get. So we did a small refactor. Let's go ahead and run the suite. And up until this point, of course, we've been running the entire suite. We really should just be running the author management test. So let's go ahead and filter down to just that one. And of course, it's still at green. All right, so let's go ahead and tackle some validation. A name is required. A little bit of review from all of the previous lessons. So the only thing I will do here is I will copy this, but again, I need to modify this data. So using array merge, we've talked about this before. As a first array, we'll pass our array of fully valid data. And then as a second array, we're going to override just the name field, and we'll set that equal to an empty string. Essentially just invalidating name, but nothing else. So if we had 100 fields here, this would only invalidate the one validation rule that we are trying to test against. So we'll have to go ahead and save the response out of this, and then we can assert against the response. So let's say response, let's make sure that the session has an error for name. That's the key that we are looking for, because that's what we're testing. All right, let's go ahead and run. Actually, let's run this whole file, and of course we get a failure because it is missing the expected key. And we know this to be true because our author's controller is doing no validation right now. So let's go ahead and tackle this. Let's do it the very naive way first. So we'll say data equals request validate. And of course we'll have an array here, which we'll say has a name, and the name is required. And we do know that it also has a date of birth. For now, we'll leave that empty. So then instead of having to do this request only, as we've been doing, we could just use this validated data. This will basically ensure that only the valid fields that we are accounting for are being passed through to our create method. All right, so let's check that out, and we are back to green. Great, let's do the other one for date of birth. We'll do a repeat on this, and we'll say a date of birth is required. We're going to hit /that, and then let's go ahead and validate DOB. Let's go ahead and run the test again, and we are failing. Of course, let's make that pass by simply just making this required. And there we go. Good job. All right, so we have a little bit better validation when it comes to this. So another refactor that I want to do is, let's go and check out the books controller very quickly. If we take a look at this, I have this validate request protected function right in here. Now this helps me because whenever I need to reuse any validation, you just call this one method and everything works. So let's go ahead and do the same exact extraction on this one, and that'll help us clean up this code a little bit. So we'll go ahead and extract this into a method. Nice little function here that we have, and we'll just say validate data is what we would like to call that function, and we'll make it protected. Private protected really doesn't matter. Okay, so we have that, and this just returns that array. So this at this point is kind of redundant. We really don't need to do that. We can actually inline this all together. So let's go ahead and cut it out, bring it in here, and so now we're left with a store method with a single line. Now I do know that this is probably going to change at some point because I'm going to need to make sure that the same author doesn't get created twice. So I will have to do some validation for that. But for now, we are in the very simple implementation of this. Our tests are still at green, so we're good to go on that. Now I did call it validate request and not validate data. So let's keep that consistent. Let me change that right now. Validate request. That does make more sense than validate data. So I like that. Validate request will be what basically just returns our validated data array. Again, the reasoning behind this is, for example, if we take a look at our books controller, we have an update method, and that is calling the validate request. But we also have this store method, which also takes advantage of this validate request. We would have had to repeat this code right here in two different places. Again, if I had to add another field to this, then I would have to change it in two places. And even furthermore, I'd have to go into my book management test and add it in every single test. Instead, we're using these nice small helpers that help us reuse as much of our code that could potentially change as possible. Just a little bit of future proofing for your code. Think of it that way. Okay, so really we are at a point in our project where I feel like it's time for us to start to take a look at how to integrate all of this work that we've done into some front end. So let's shift our focus all together. Let's go ahead and pull in some Vue and some Tailwind. That way we can start to manipulate some of this code through the actual browser. So let's start off with the following. Right now, if we take a look at my app.scss file, we have all of this code right here. The Laravel homepage, Bootstrap all together, variables. There's a lot of stuff here. So why don't we clean all of this out all together and go ahead and start fresh. So let's go ahead and make a quick commit for this just so that we know that all of the changes we made to authors and books are all saved. So I'll actually use the inline editor right here, and we could say get status, and of course we have all of these files. I do have a package lock JSON here that also needs to go ahead and be added, but for now let's go ahead and add everything that we have in line. Then let's make a new get commit with the following message. Work in progress for authors, and change route from author to authors. Basically just a quick summary of what we just did. Now this is a brand new machine, so it looks like some of our setup is not done in Git. So let me go ahead and take care of that right now. Alright, so let me go ahead and change this email right here. And let's go ahead and change the name here to be Victor. Alright, so let me go ahead and uncomment these lines just to make sure that these do take effect. And then as it says here, after doing this, you can fix the identity of the commit by resetting and running this command. So let me go ahead and run that command. Yep, that sounds good. Alright, so that's good to go. Let's move on to the next thing. So like I said, I want to clean all of this out. So to do that, we run PHP artisan preset. Now, if you're not familiar with presets, let me go ahead and run PHP artisan help preset first, just to show you what we have. What we can actually do is choose one of the different types of presets that are available. If we run the none, that will basically strip everything out, and then we can run Vue just to have Vue, because right now we have Bootstrap and Vue. So I just want Vue. So let me go ahead and run PHP artisan preset none, and let me show you what that does first. Let me go back here to PHP Storm, and as you see, this file totally empty. Also my app.js file in my resources, totally empty. And then our bootstrap.js, all this has is just Axios, and it's making sure that our CSRF tokens are properly being passed through. So this is essentially nothing at all. Let's go ahead and bring in Vue now. So we'll say PHP artisan preset Vue. And of course, now if we come back here, we take a look at app.js. Now we have this window.vue, and we are requiring Vue. And of course, in my Bootstrap, no changes there. Nothing in app.scss either. However, if we take a look at the package.json file, of course, Vue has been brought in as a dependency. All right, so now we're ready to install npm for the very first time. So let's go ahead and run, as suggested here, let's run npm install. Okay, and that is all done. Let me go ahead now and visit the Tailwind website and start to pull that in. Let's go to tailwindcss.com. So now let's take a look at the getting started section. And the very first thing we need to do is, of course, go ahead and pull in through npm. Now I will go ahead and save this under my development dependencies and not just my dependencies. So we'll add the --save-dev. Now just on a quick side note of that, you have this dev dependencies here, but you could have dependencies as well. Now the way the workflow works, where we actually compile our code using Webpack, you don't actually need to have any dependencies in a production server. So that's why it's better that we add that --save-dev. All right, so now if we take a look here, we have Tailwind CSS. Great. Let's keep following the instructions. So we need to add this to our CSS. So let me go ahead and copy these lines. And let's go into my app.scss file, and we'll just paste those right here at the top. Okay, let's keep running through these instructions. Now if you want to create a config file, which we do, let's go ahead and run npx. Notice how this is x and not npm. npx tailwind init. We'll run that command. So that creates a tailwind.config.js. Let's take a look. Back in PHP Storm, we now have this tailwind.config.js. Any of your additional things that you'd want to add, that's where this is going to go. Now, right now, everything, of course, is empty, and that's okay. But we definitely want to set up this project to have some nice custom stuff in Tailwind. So we need this file, otherwise we can't compile our code. All right, back to the instructions. And now we do want to process our CSS. Now, we're not going to use the CLI. If we keep scrolling here, we actually have a Laravel mix section right here. So this very first one is just if you want the plain old CSS. In our case, we're using Sass. So this is the version that we want. So let's go ahead and copy these options, because this line right here, it's actually already in there for us. And I'll show you that in just a second. Now the file that this is referring to is the file called webpack.mix.js. And it's right at the root directory of every Laravel project. And here it is. Here's that one line I told you, it's already there. So let's add a new one here for options. And the other thing we need to do is maybe make this a little prettier. Let's make this into a new line. So now it's requesting this Tailwind CSS function. So we need to go ahead and pull in that at the top. So we'll copy that line right after mix. We'll paste that in. And now we need a path to that tailwind.config.js file, this one. Now, of course, this is basically right next to each other. If you look over here on the bottom, you have Tailwind config right next to webpack.mix. So all you need is just a /tailwind config.js. And with that, we're basically ready to go. Let's go ahead and run npm run dev for the very first time. This does take a couple of minutes, so let's let it do its thing, and we'll be right back. Okay, and we are all done. So everything got compiled down for us, and we are good to go. So the very first view I want to handle is going to be with our authors. And the reason for that is because you really can't create a book unless you have some authors in the database. So let's go ahead and start hacking away at one of these views. Let me go into my views directory. That's going to be resources, views, and we do have this layout. Now this app.blade layout is what ships with Laravel. Now right now it is riddled with all of this Bootstrap stuff that I don't really need, and that's really just a navigation. So why don't we disable and just comment out the navigation for now. I will comment out every single line in that, and we can use the rest of this. Now the nice thing with this app.blade layout is that it does include your JS already and your CSS. All of your compile stuff is being pulled in here. So that's a nice thing. We can get rid of these fonts right here and clean this up a little bit. Okay, so let's change our name. This is not going to be Laravel, but this is going to be, for now, just library. Still looking for a good name for this project. So if you have any ideas, definitely let me know what we should call this project. I've just been calling it library all along. Okay, so as you know, in my authors controller, you know that the way that I label all of my views is using authors dot and then the name of my method. So the very first method that we need is the create method. So let's go ahead and do create, and this is going to return a new view, which doesn't exist yet, in my authors dot create. Again, the following convention, authors being authors that belongs to that controller, and then the create. And then the create belongs to the name of this method. This really helps me to find the appropriate views for each of these methods without even thinking about it. It's a nice workflow to get into. Let me go ahead and create a new file here. It's going to be inside an authors directory, and it's going to be called create.blade.php. We'll go ahead and add that to Git, and we're going to say add extends. What does it extend? It extends layouts.app, and of course we're going to have section of content, and let's go ahead and end that section. Alright, in here we'll just have a div, and really just for now I do want to test that Tailwind got pulled in properly. However, I can already see all of my classes here, so I know it came in, but let's go ahead and do a BG gray 300 or something like that, and let's give this a height of screen. That way we know that everything is working. Okay, so we're almost ready. Now I still don't have a route for this, so let's go ahead and add a new route for my authors. Let's create a new one. This is not going to be a post, but it's going to be a get, and it's going to be at authors/create. Now another consistency here, you don't have to start everything with the leading slash, but it looks like I kind of did around everything else, so let's go ahead and keep that consistent. So we'll change these routes to /author, and this is going to hit my create method. Okay, let's go ahead and give it a go. Very first time we actually pull this up in our browser. So let's go to authors/create, and sure enough, we got Tailwind, we got everything ready to go. Alright, so let's jump right to this. Inside this content, yes, we're going to need navigation, we're going to need all that. I am not concerned with any of that just yet. I want the simplest possible implementation that I can have. So why don't we say, how about give me a width of 2/3, and then let's go ahead and have a background of gray 200, and then I want to have this centered on the page. So let me go ahead and add a margin X of auto. That will do the trick for us. If I hit refresh, there is no content there. Let me add a little bit of content, and sure enough, so this is centered just where I want it. So now here comes the nice thing with our tests. It will guide the process of doing this, because if we take a look at the authors management test, we know that we're going to need a name and a DOB, a date of birth. These are the only two things required. So we're going to need a div. We're really going to need 3. So let's go ahead and create 3 of them. And the first one is going to have an input of type text, and that's going to be of name. And let's go ahead and have a placeholder of full name. Okay. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing with the date of birth. So that's going to be DOB. We'll say here date of birth. And of course down here we'll need a button. And this button will just be called add new author. There we go. Now this whole thing of course is going to need to be wrapped in a form tag. So let's just go ahead and take care of that now. And where is the action going to be? Well, let's take a look at our test. Our action is going to be /authors, and it's going to be a post request. We've already written all the code to make this work, so really we just need to write the view to make it happen. So our method is going to be post. Okay, now we do need our CSRF token, but we'll let the code kind of guide us there. Let's take a look at this. Refresh. Doesn't look like much right now, so let's start to add some classes to this. First and foremost, let me add some padding. Let's do padding top of 4. And let's do that to each of these right here just to add a little bit more spacing. Yeah, that looks better. And then let's go ahead and add a little bit of padding all the way around in the entire thing. So we'll say P5 perhaps, maybe 6. So P6, that looks good. Let's start with the button, as this is the easiest one. Let's do a BG blue, maybe 400. We'll have text that is white, and we'll do rounded corners all the way around. Let's check that out. Okay, that's looking good. Let's add a little bit of padding. Let's go ahead and do a padding top and bottom of 2. And then let's do padding left and right with PX of 4. Let's take a look at that. Okay, that's looking good. Now these right here, these input types, let's go ahead and style them right now. So we'll go to the end and let's add some classes. First and foremost, let's add rounded, so that way the corners are rounded. And let's go ahead and add a little bit of padding. This will make the world of difference. Let's add the same exact thing, px4 and py2. Right away, this starts to look like a real website. All right, so let's make them a little bit wider. Let's say maybe a width of, let's try 32. Let's see what that looks like. That's too small. Let's do width of 1/2. That's good. Now let's go ahead and center the whole thing. I just feel like that's going to look better. So what we could do is turn this into a flex container. And then we can say, all right, go ahead and flex, but let's flip into columns. If we take a look at this now, it should look exactly the same. But now we can say items center, and we can actually center the whole thing. Now it looks like we lost our width because it's at half. Let's go ahead and actually give this a value. Let's say width, do we have a 64? We do. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now it looks like this flex is being affected by this form. So this item center will actually have to be in the form in order for us to be centered. Because right now we are centering our block, but each of the individual items are not centered. And I do want everything centered. Let's see. Let's go ahead and add some classes here. Let's move all of this in here and let's see what happens. Sure enough, that'll fix it. So of course, because this form is the one that's acting on each of these divs, that's why we need to move this a little bit closer into our actual HTML. Okay, let's add a title to this. We'll say h1, add new author. And sure enough, we have a nice title. Let's add a shadow to this small box here. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but it adds a nice little shadow all the way around here. And so at that point, we're basically good to go. Are we ready to test this? Yeah, pretty much. So if I go ahead and hit this, the first thing I get is page expired. As I mentioned before, we are missing the CSRF. So let's go ahead and add that now. At CSRF. Let's go back here, hit refresh. And now it seems like nothing happened. But what is really happening is we're hitting the server. We're getting some validation errors back, but we're not displaying them just yet. So let's go ahead and do something right here. Right at the top of this, I'm going to do just a temporary dump of this variable of errors. Now, if you are familiar with this, bear with me for just a second. But of course, this is our error bag. Whenever we do any validation with Laravel, it returns this errors, and this errors is simply just an error bag that contains any validation errors inside. So I just want to take a look at what we're actually getting because of that. So right now our bag is totally empty. If we hit add new, a little bit different. So we have two errors as we see here. We have one for name saying the name field is required, and we have one for date of birth saying the date of birth field is required. So we need a way to basically tap into this, make sure that there's one for each one, and maybe display a nice message underneath here. So let's start with that. So right underneath this input field, we can say something like at if. So we need to check if it has errors. Actually, before I do this, let me erase this for just a second. Let me show you how to do that. So we can say errors, and then we have this nice helper function of has. And to that, we can pass name. So check this out. If I hit refresh right now, we get false. Now if I go ahead and add new author, then I get true, meaning there is an error for name. Great, so we're going to use this. Let's go ahead and copy this out. And again, let's go back to what we were doing before. Let's say if it has an error for name, we're going to do something. So let's go ahead, and if we have an error, maybe we can add a p tag. And let's go ahead and add some classes here of text red. Let's try 600 at first. And now I want to grab that error message. So we can do that by saying errors. So we have this errors, but again, each could be different. So all we need to do is grab the first one. Give me the first error, right? And we'll tackle the first one in each instance. All right, so let's take a look at it in the browser. So of course it has false. If I hit this, now we have the name field is required. Exactly what we were looking for. We can actually stop dumping this errors up here, and let's do something very similar with our date of birth. add the same thing, but this is not going to be for name, but rather this is going to be for date of birth. And now if we click add new author, we do notice that we have this name field for both of them. Okay, no problem. Easy fix there. All we need to do is pass in a field name to each of these first calls. So we'll add name and then DOB. Now let's take a look at the difference. And sure enough, now we get the correct error. Okay, so this is working. This is good. This will work in a lot of versions of Laravel. However, there is a new helper, and that is the @error helper. So why don't we refactor this to see if that's any cleaner for us. So let's check this out. I'm going to actually comment this out just so that we see a side by side. So we have this new error, and to error we could say name. So basically, if you have a name, then let me go ahead and copy this p tag right here. And then we don't need to do any of this. As a matter of fact, we can actually just use message. And message is provided for you inside this error. And then we'll say end error. And let's check out on the browser. Refresh. Same exact thing. However, we don't have to check if it has a name. We don't have to do this first or anything like that. I think it's nice and clean. Let me go ahead and keep this. And let me refactor the date of birth as well. So instead of name, we're going to do DOB. And we can get rid of these 3 lines. And we have a nice little helper to do that. Very cool. Very easy. So again, this is kind of new. So if this is not working for you, then it means that the Laravel version doesn't have this feature just yet. So go ahead and do the other version. I did want to show you both just so that we see how that works. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to validate this. I'll say Victor and then 05/14/1988, add new author, and sure enough, we tried to hit our database and now we don't have one set up. Let's set up an Sqlite database very quickly just to wrap up this lesson. So we could say touch database, and then it's going to be called database.sqlite. Now, if you don't have touch available because you're in Windows, then you're going to have to create this database.sqlite file inside the database directory manually. Just go ahead and create that. And then we do need to change our env. So let's browse through here, .env. Right now it's set up to MySQL. So let's change that to SQLite and erase everything else. Okay, so with that, PHP artisan, migrate, and there we go. Okay, let's go back to the Chrome and let's see if we can make this happen now. Refresh, and sure enough, it doesn't show anything, but believe me, this did get added to our database. So how cool is that? We were able to write all this code, and we know that all this code works, and we did all of it using TDD, and then we just simply made a view, and we know that the code works. We're not worried about adding this authors and database and all of that. We already took care of that, so we don't have to worry about it. That's the nice thing of using a TDD workflow. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this lesson. It's a little bit long, but I feel like you get the point. We did a lot in this lesson. So go ahead and review it. If you have any questions at all, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions on any of the Laravel stuff, I do have a full Laravel 5.8 from scratch. So you can visit any of these concepts and learn anything that you missed in this episode. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and keep working out these views.